Something that's been pointed out on Twitter while we've been talking is that of the entire panel, I'm the only one here not sporting any kind of impressive facial hair. So while we're doing the next question, I'm going to use this pen to draw some upon myself. So talk amongst yourselves if I do this.
Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast, a developer discussion that dives deep into all things web. We discuss topics relevant to developing for the modern web and the web platform of today, tomorrow, and beyond.
The Web Platform Podcast is a proud media sponsor of DevFest 2015. DevFest is a conference with great sessions and code labs on Android, wearables, Polymer, AngularJS, Google Cloud Platform, Meteor, and many others. Show host Danny Blue and I, Eric Isaacson, will be speakers at this event, and we'd love to meet you all there, so come hang out with us in Dulles, Virginia. Yes, this event will be held at AOL headquarters in Dulles, Virginia, Friday, September 11th and Saturday, September 12th, 2015. For event registration details, check out devfestdc.org and click on the Eventbrite link. Hope to see you there. Do you want to attend a conference with top-level Angular speakers, but you can't afford the cost or the inconvenience of traveling? Well, Angular Remote Conf is an online conference September 24th through September 25th with live interactions, a dedicated forum, respected leaders in the Angular community, and best of all, you never have to leave the comfort of your own home to attend. The Web Platform Podcast listeners receive a 20% discount for Angular Remote Conf. All you have to do is use Web Platform, that's WEBPLATFORM, as the coupon code at checkout, and you get 20% off. And this works for group tickets, standard tickets, and early bird tickets. Head on over to angularremoteconf.com. That's ANGULARREMOTECONF. That's angularremoteconf, all one word, .com, and sign up ASAP to get the maximum amount of savings.
Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. This is episode number 60. I'm your host, Eric Isaacson, and we have on the panel Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
And James Duval, who's new to our panel. And we're going to be talking about offline first, and we have a lot of guests today. Offline first is something that I wanted to do when I first started the podcast. It's like, I'm going to do this second episode. And it just never happened. It's been like over a year now, so I'm really glad we get to do it. We did an episode on ServiceWorker not too long ago, about 7-8 months. So it'd be nice to catch up and see kind of how everything's progressing with Offline First. So our guests are Jake Archibald.
Hello.
And Alex Russell.
Hey, how's it going?
And Jan, can you pronounce your last name? I'm sorry.
Lehnardt. Say Lehnardt, it's fine.
and John Kleinschmidt?
Kleinschmidt, yes. Hi.
Okay. So do you guys want to introduce yourselves, I guess, in the order? So Jake, you're kind of infamous, so go ahead.
I'm Jake Archibald. I work at Google doing DevRel things. I previously worked at a startup called Lehnardt where I worked on making their mobile site work offline. And then I got roped into doing that kind of thing at Google as well. So I'm one of the spec writers on ServiceWorker, which I'm sure we'll cover, and also working on sort of bits of features that build on top of ServiceWorker as well, such as background sync.
Nice. And Alex, I was really surprised you were not on webcomponents.org, so I added you.
Oh, thanks.
So, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm in kind of Jake's less funny, less witty engineering side doppelganger. We both kind of worked on the ServiceWorker design, mostly when I was living in London, and it was easier for us to sort of like pop down to the Mozilla offices. But these days I'm in San Francisco, and I'm one of the tech leads for the project that's kind of doing a lot of this work, as well as push notifications and add to home screen, and a lot of the kind of app-like behaviors that we're trying to get into the web platform.
And Jan?
I've been working on a database called Couch.DB for a couple of years. You may have heard of it. It's the original offline database, and all the things that we're talking about, I tried to get into people's heads for a number of years now, since about 2008. I'm finally happy that with Offline First we have a label where we can have a broader discussion about that whole thing. Out of the work that we did with Couch came a project called Hood.ie, which is our offline first web framework, or like an encapsulated backend that allows you to build offline capable front-end apps, and that all should work very nicely with all of the ServiceWorker stuff that the other guys are doing.
And do you do the newsletter too for offline.org?
Yeah, offline first org. Yeah.
Excellent. And John?
Yeah, so I work for an organization called Cure International. We have charitable hospitals in the developing world, so offline is really important to us because the places we work in, we don't have great internet connectivity. And the main thing I've been doing these days is working on an offline first project called Hospital Run, which is open source hospital information system for charitable hospitals.
Excellent. So, I don't know, I'll just kind of throw this one out there. What is offline first, and why do developers really care? Like, why should we be building this way?
Well, it's really interesting because there's been a kind of discussion about this very recently, where we're trying to decide whether offline first means anything that works offline, or does it refer to a specific model of how things work offline? And I believe the latter. I believe offline first to be like mobile first is for mobile. So if your site or app works offline first, it means it gets meaningful content on the screen before it even goes to the network, or certainly without using the network. And then it can optionally go to the network and enhance from there. It's a kind of, you treat the network as a progressive enhancement, and if the network isn't there, then you do something that's, you react to that in a way that isn't disruptive to the user. So that could be a small message to kind of indicate, yeah, we tried to fetch fresh content, and we couldn't. Or it could just be not mentioning it at all because the experience is going to be fine. So the alternative to that is online first, where you go to the network, and when that fails, you fall back to some kind of offline experience. And that's great when the user has perfect connectivity, and it's pretty great when the user has absolutely no connectivity because they get the fallback straight away. It leaves you in a slightly odd situation where you're usually getting a faster response when you're offline to when you're online. But the situation it doesn't cater for is when you have this kind of one bar of signal or even full bar of signal, but something is broken between you and the server, and you're just getting that infinite spinner or infinite white screen where your machine thinks it has a connection, but it's not getting any data through it. And that's something I've been calling Li-Fi because I experience it every day on the train to work. And if you were working in an online first model, you make absolutely no difference there. The device is still going to sit there trying to make a connection for minutes before it decides to fail and show the perfectly good content that's already sat on the user's device.
Yeah, I think we should clarify that this is largely about the top-level resource, right? And it's pretty uncontroversial that if you have, some technology for doing local storage, it's a pretty good idea to cache as much of the resources and user data as possible. And the HTTP cache is probably going to try to do a good job for you there, as long as you haven't screwed up your caching headers. The real fight here is about what to do with the very top-level request when you navigate to example.com. Where does that get go?
And then maybe taking it a little out of the more technical discussion of how this all works, the way we came to using offline first, the term has been around for a while, but we there's in the list apart article where we kind of put it all together. The change in approach is more of a mindset. It's like we appreciate that offline is not an error scenario, but something that just happens every day, and we need to design with that in mind, like from the get-go. And I don't actually care if it's ServiceWorker or AppCache or anything else that does that, but I want to try to accommodate the real world scenario here, as opposed to we pretend we're online all the time and that's not the case. And there's technical implementation of how to get content to you, like getting HTML and JavaScript to you so you can use an app to get data to you. If you want to do email, how to get some of the data to you, but not your whole email archive while you're on Edge somewhere, but you want to do something useful there, like selective data sync is interesting there. And then there's a whole lot of user interface questions that haven't been answered really, like how do I deal with an offline state and partially offline state? What does an outbox that we understand from an email and IMAP metaphor mean for a collaborative media application? Like what scenario how do we talk about this? We don't even have words, so we started the offlinefirst.org and the newsletter and the GitHub group and everything to start a discussion about all these things. And then I think Jake and Alex swooped in from the side. We have this ServiceWorker thing here. It does a lot of the stuff, and I think like for me and the people who have worked in this space for a while, it wasn't too hard to think about, like, extrapolate and say, okay, these are the user interface issues that we're going to be facing, that we need. What's the hamburger menu of offline, or what's the submit button of offline? Like, these things don't, or what's the save button? Like, all these things haven't been discussed yet or discovered yet. But it was really hard for people to extrapolate like we did because we've been in here. And then I think like ServiceWorkers coming around, and a lot of people can now start building demos and understanding things and seeing all the things that Jake builds, and think, oh, that's what they mean, and okay, now we have these problems, and then we can finally talk about the things that I'm really curious about, like, okay, how do I communicate partially synchronized state as opposed to offline is better somehow. So yeah, this is where I had hoped we would have been further now, but I'm also happy to be patient to explore it, and so that everybody can come along.
So, like, something that's been pointed out on Twitter while we've been talking is that of the entire panel, I'm the only one here not sporting any kind of impressive facial hair. So, while we're doing the next question, I'm going to use this pen to draw some upon myself. So, talk amongst yourselves if I do this.
Yeah. So, in terms of the offline first kind of patterns, Jan, kind of, what do you think is sort of the most important or the most common one that you see people adopting when they kind of look at doing offline first or adopting this model?
UX pattern or like a technical?
I mean, the UX pattern. I think the technical patterns are something we should talk about in a minute, but the UX patterns that you're working on are really interesting.
I'll pass on that for now. I'll answer that when I can think of something that's really good. I think it is really early. Like, I don't see many people doing this. We're still in the exploratory state of this. There's been a neat discussion about like using, like, just showing how far your stuff has been synced, like using, like, what kind of like graphics we're using for this. So instead of like a floppy disk to say save, we have like a ring that fills partially or changes color or isn't quite full until it's synced, or it has like sorry, I gotta laugh about Jake for a second here. Like it's partially filled or is dotted or something, but I don't think I've seen anything impressive here. I don't think I've seen the killer app for offline yet, or the killer feature or pattern in that regard. Yeah, I can't think of anyone right now.
I could only, the biro didn't work. I've had to use permanent marker. So one, this might be permanent, and two, because I've done it right under my nose, I'm getting quite high right now.
As far as, you know, the old way we used to do this, you know, as far as standards go in the web, my understanding was app cache, and then, you know, obviously we talked about this in ServiceWorker where app cache was flawed in a lot of ways. You know, why are we abandoning app cache, and, you know, and what's with ServiceWorker in that sense?
Okay. Well, I would say we're so much abandoning it as it sort of never had a posse. I mean, Jake, his fine mustachio itself, is one of the few people in the world who I'm aware of who actually made an app cache site go. I know that Andy Sullivan did the same thing for Google Sheets, spreadsheets offline, and Eric Arvidsson did the same thing for Gmail with Gears, which was sort of an earlier incarnation of kind of the same model. And nobody who I've talked to has a good word to say about that model.
Yeah, most of the people I've seen implemented are using Cordova or, you know, Launchair or something like that. Not really a standard web type application.
And one of the use cases just you can't sort out is like, so if your page contains a responsive image, you can't cache the image that gets requested. Like, you're kind of left with the choice of, if you want that to work offline, you must cache every possible image it could load, and you instantly kind of remove all the benefits of responsive images while you do that. At that point, you may as well just use the maximum.
So in that case, do you use something like a match media to run the service worker?
Well, so with ServiceWorker, you get to hear about every request that comes down the wire. So in the case of like a responsive image, if it's kind of content imagery, such as like an image that comes along with a like something like a Twitter post or something, you just cache it as it's requested. So you can, when you request it within the service worker, you kind of duplicate the response, put one in the cache, and then send one off to the browser at the same time. Now you could do something smart, like if a request comes in later and it's a request for a lower resolution version of the same image, you could just send the one back that you've already got. Because you're like, well, there's no point downloading a lower resolution version. I've got something better already. If the request is for a higher resolution version, you could try the network and then fall back if it fails, or you could return just whatever you've got and maybe try and cache the high resolution version for next time, or dynamically do a swap on the page when, or indeed if, the high resolution version arrives.
So I'm always curious. I mean, do developers understand? I mean, there are a lot of patterns when we talk about offline, and it gets somewhat confusing if you've never had to work with offline assets and sort of the gotchas are there. Obviously, we have libraries and frameworks and tooling that are sort of coming in play. I mean, is this enough? Is it too complicated? I don't think it is. I mean, Duval and I have written a code lab about it. We've deployed 4 production offline apps. Like, it works great. But is the barrier to entry too high?
There's a big change to be had here in terms of how you structure your application. There's some good sort of correspondence with the way that many of the JavaScript frameworks that people are starting to adopt now work. So many of them have the notion of a separated data model from some sort of a view controller and templating. I know that if you look at the way an offline working Ember app or a React app or even a Polymer app work, you see basically the same architecture for the offline style as you do for the online style, the normal online style, which is pretty different because you kind of, when you use one of these frameworks, you aren't tempted to smush all your data into the HTML payload. That's kind of an optimization that you use to get your data binding going quickly when you're serving the top-level first page, but it's not kind of what you do all the time. So you have this nice clean separation between your data model and your view. And that's kind of the secret sauce, which is that you can sort of treat your application as like a shell of stuff that you then load with data. I'd actually like to hear more about the hospital app and kind of how that was accomplished there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so, Alex, just like you said, that some of the secret sauce that really helps it work is, that separation of, the model and the view. In the case of Hospital Run, it is an Ember app. And for me, to be able to switch out to a server-side API really just would involve changing, kind of the data layer. So from that perspective, it's gotten a lot better. So I've been working on offline apps for a number of years now. I think probably like 4 years. And the first app I built was IndexedDB, kind of homespun, and really it got painful. But now the tooling really has evolved. In our case, we're using PouchDB syncing to Couch. So we get kind of replication for free. Not that there aren't some complexities there, but a lot of the tooling is there now to make it easier to do those things. And I think as service workers evolve, we're going to see even more tooling around that to basically make it easier for developers to do these things on a more easier scale and be able to get work done quickly.
How critical would you say that it is to have a synchronization engine? I've had it sort of in the back of my mind for some years now that that there's going to be an add-on framework core, which is, kind of like that synchronization model. That data layer is going to be operational transform. Is going to be something like PouchDB with CRDTs. Like, what's it going to be? I just keep thinking that it's going to happen any minute now, and PouchDB seems to be pretty far ahead there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there aren't a lot of options unless you want to do it on your own, and so I would love to see more solutions like that. And actually, I'm excited about service workers because I think one of the things we could see is building tooling where you could take you wouldn't necessarily need to store your data offline and then synchronize it online, but rather you're capturing the network requests that come in, you're saving them to play back at some other time. So yeah, technically, I guess maybe you're storing them somewhat, but I think it gives us more flexibility in how that plays out, and I think tooling is going to come out of that where different synchronization techniques will come forward.
One of the problems I see in this space is that the way you handle your user experience, the UX of your application, is directly tied to your data layer, how you do synchronization. And the way we're doing it in Couch and Pouch is a very specific way that allows you to do some things that are really nice, but that also have some limitations that people are used to. Or like you can't do things that you usually do. So we have a hard time getting people ramped on to this model. And I'm not sure that there is I'm looking forward for the war that Alex just described. I see the contenders. I understand how they work. I'm trying to push everyone to try out everything to show us what's the best thing for developers to adopt. But nothing has clearly emerged yet, and I'm kind of in the back of my head. I want to find a student that writes a bachelor master's thesis that just compares all the different synchronization engines with the typical application requirements, and then just says, okay, the 80-20 solution is the Couch Pouch sync, and the 10% solution for this use case is operational transforms, and the rest of the 10% is some CRDT, and then specialized custom do your own thing. But that's I'm the Couch vendor, so I kind of want my thing to be the 80-20 one. But if any of the others win, I don't care. What I'm really interested in is having a web that has that things that Alex brings up time and time again, that compete with native experiences, that has phenomenal load times that people love to use, that gains developer mindshare again because it just allows you to build really, really cool things. I don't care what the technology is there, but it's like you say, friends don't let friends build their own cryptography. It's the same thing as friends don't let friends build their own synchronization engines. And I've been doing this for nearly a decade, and I don't want to do it ever again. And I still can't cover all the use cases that developers want from me. So there's a lot of work to be done. And on the other hand, there's more and more people thinking about this, and maybe we're getting a global mindshare going that we find come to something that we all can use.
Yeah, one of the first projects I actually saw for offline was Hood.ie, and I was really impressed with that one. But didn't get as much, once ServiceWorker came along, didn't get as much power, as far as people were like, oh, ServiceWorker is going to be a standard in the web browsers, so we won't need this, and it sort of got overlooked. But I really think that there's a lot of room for Hood.ie. Even, do you feel like in the future, you would use ServiceWorker underneath for some of this? Can you talk about the project a little bit so that we understand?
So the goal for Hood.ie is, our belief is that while the web is very accessible and you can learn HTML and CSS, a bit of JavaScript, in a weekend or in a day, and you can be productive with it without studying computer science, when you want to do something real, you need somebody who does your Rails, your Java, your PHP. You need to build, you need to host your WordPress, something, I don't know. You need someone who understands backend technology, deploying things, and we think this is way too hard. So the open web in that regard is like an open window on the second floor. You need your own ladder to go through, and not everyone has that ladder. And with Hood.ie, we're building a front-end API, something that you can understand if you're capable of copy and pasting jQuery snippets that you find on the web, then you should be able to use Hood.ie, and gives you accounts, data storage, sending email, all the things that a backend does, but with a nice front-end API. And since one of the things that we think is important in Hood.ie is that we have offline first apps, is that the default way of that we just build into Hood.ie. If you build a Hood.ie app, it's an offline first app. There's nothing you need to do. But we kind of don't tackle the things that ServiceWorker tackles. We do data synchronization and handle, make sure that is all like things that were explained with the John explained with the hospital things, apps. But we currently don't concern ourselves with like loading really fast or caching things offline. We have a Node module that does a bunch of app cache magic for us called App Cache Nanny, because it makes the app cache behave. Now you can work with Hood.ie, but you can also use standalone if you want. But like that particular thing, we're waiting for the web platform to solve for us. So we're on top of the things that like say we live in a world where everybody has ServiceWorker and resources render really fast and get cached correctly and everything is really nice, as Jake and Alex explained. There's a layer on top of that, like how do I get my user data going? How do I synchronize stuff back and forth? Maybe I can even do this peer-to-peer between browsers. I don't even need a server anymore. Like there's a whole lot of stuff that ServiceWorker currently isn't addressed to do, and I think eventually we'll get there. But I think all the technology we're using or will be using Pouch.DB really soon. We have a custom sync thing now, don't worry about that. But the things that actually do the network for us, they will be using ServiceWorker up to the wazoo to get the most out of the web platform at some point. But I think I see this in layers. There's the ServiceWorker app cache layer, the web platform, what that gives us, the data sync layer, and I'd love for the web platform to have a standardized one, but like I explained earlier, I don't think there can be one, but I also want to see one, so we'll see where that goes. But maybe there's a way to, I don't know, maybe there's a plugin mechanism. I don't know what's going to happen. Well, then on top of that, we have all the UX and UI things that we haven't talked about. So these are all distinct things that people are already working on with different speeds. And I think the thing that has the most leverage, and I think that's why it gets the most press these days, aside from having people working on it full time, unlike other things, is ServiceWorker, of course, because it's like, it'll be in browsers, everybody can use this. And then when you want to use Hood.ie, it's like, okay, you have to just subscribe to the whole Hood.ie philosophy and how you store data and how that's all different from you're used to a Rails and MySQL situation. And that's a little bit harder for adoption than, say, ServiceWorker, which isn't in all browsers yet, but it will be, so you can start looking into it and it's going to be standard. And we'll be all loving it.
That's a good point too. There is a lot of different. I didn't even realize, because you're doing data synchronization, whereas ServiceWorker would be doing other types of synchronization. So it's interesting. It didn't occur to me at first that there would be all of these different use cases and different ways to do this. Do you think that this could be very confusing, like doing a network approach first versus a cache approach? How do we figure out all of the different? I guess this is a softball for your cookbook, Jake. But how do we figure out all these different approaches? Like, what would be best for our applications?
Okay, I'll mention the cookbook. So I've got a blog post on this called the Offline Cookbook, which tries to cover all of the certainly all of the patterns I'm aware of, like whether you go network first and then fall back to the cache, or do you go to the cache and the network at the same time and race them, because it is possible for the network to beat the cache. Do you go get the cache stuff and then go to the network and update the page? And I mean, it's largely dependent on the type of resource that you're loading. I mean, for your CSS and the JavaScript, just go to the cache straight away. That's something that you should have kind of within the ServiceWorker's install step. An avatar, you can get it from the cache if you already have it, but then go to the network and update the avatar in the background. Because something like an avatar, if you have an out-of-date avatar for one request, it doesn't really matter. For page content, I think the ideal solution is to go to the cache, get everything that you have on the user's device, and then pull in stuff from the network if you receive it. But then some of Jan was alluding to this earlier, that there's a lot of kind of UI complication in how do you swap out the cache content for the fresh content without being disruptive to the user. And once again, I mean, that for different kinds of content, there are different ways to approach it, and it's mostly an unexplored problem. For timeline-based content, such as Twitter, it's relatively easy. You just put the new content on the top, and point an arrow to tell the user that they scroll up to see the new stuff. If it's an article where you're picking up corrections, I mean, that's a lot more complicated. The simplest solution is to display a message to the user saying, there's an updated version, click here to swap the content out. You could, of course, try more complicated stuff, like if you know the changes are all further down the page than the user has scrolled, then you can just get away with swapping it. But I mean, that requires diffing and checking where these changed elements are. But I mean, maybe someone would be brave enough to take that on.
Well, then take that further. You have a collaborative drawing app, and then you're offline for a bit, and somebody deleted the thing that you intersected with, and now your drawing doesn't make any sense anymore. And how do you merge drawings? There's a whole lot of stuff that we have yet to figure out. And maybe like for some of the things, the answer is this just can't be done offline. Like you want to have a centralized service that authenticates users. You need to be able to talk to that centralized source to authenticate users. So that this can't be done offline. Of course, there's authentication mechanisms that can work offline, but these are still being worked out to a degree, and they're not very widespread and not very well understood. So there's I think we'll come up with a bunch of things that here's a problem space. Or maybe let me take a step back. When we did Hood.ie and people asked us, so what are going to be the UX problems that we're going to have when using this? And okay, we'll just go into the big library of user interface patterns, get the big volume on offline user interface patterns, and then we'll just give them that to read, so they can do that. That library doesn't exist, and that book doesn't exist, and that volume doesn't exist. None of these things exist. So we'll be like one of the things we tried to get going with the GitHub organization offline first is to get everyone together to just dump everything they can find so we can compile that volume so that you can go in. I want to do authentication. What options do I have? Okay, I need a centralized server. It can't be offline. Okay, can I work around that? Does that work for me? Okay, it needs to be offline. I'll use this approach. What benefits does it have? Next thing, I want to send email. Can I do this offline? Okay, yeah, we know IMAP. We kind of can model IMAP, like not the protocol, but the behavior on top of everything we just talked about. Like, we understand this is fine. Okay, back to the drawing app. How do I merge drawings? No idea. So all this stuff needs to be figured out, and I hope all the listeners and viewers to this podcast can help join us to figure this out.
So at that point, though, so there are some cases where likely offline doesn't work great for a user experience, but beyond just the overall user experience of the thing they can actually do where they're receiving data, we get performance gains, right? Like, there are significant performance gains to be had even if your entire application can't be brought offline based on its state or whatever you need to do in that thing. Could we talk about some of those performance gains?
Well, this is something where I get to be a distributed system smartass. There's in networking there's bandwidth and latency, and everybody's always raving about bandwidth, but the thing that matters for good user experience is the latency, of course. And there's never a computer that has lower latency than localhost. So anything that you can already have there, it will always intrinsically be faster. And I'll let Alex jump in with the more detailed explanation of how this pertains to ServiceWorker and everything else.
Just to put a minor caveat on that. We have talked to some people who have, old computers loaded down with malware and antivirus, usually at the same time, where local disk is not particularly fast. They are a very far outlier, however, and in almost every case, if you don't have to go to the network specifically on a mobile device, you're going to be out of the gates faster than you would be if you had to consult a server potentially tens of hops away from you. So the real advantage here, specifically from the browser perspective, if you think about the way a browser consumes a web page, if you serve the shell of your application, right, that top-level HTML asset that is the thing that lets you start requesting CSS, JavaScript, fonts, all the other stuff that your application is going to need to start booting up, to be parsing, to start rendering, getting DOM on screen. If you can start that process faster, we can get you to a place where your application is booted faster. And the most important thing you can do here is to make sure that that top-level request never hits the network. Service workers let you do that without kind of rejiggering anything about the structure of your application, but you do have to think about your application as being a distinct shell and then data that you're going to load into it, with data being kind of the thing that you can go to the network for and request updates for, and you can use some of the on the offline first patterns to sort of communicate to users what work you're doing when. But sort of the way to think about this is that Ilya Grigorik has put together a kind of a table of the time that it takes to get an initial connection on a mobile device. On a 3G device with an already warm connection, it can be a couple of 100 milliseconds for a round trip. But that's the best case scenario. On an LTE connection with a warm connection, it can be somewhat better. On a 2G or 3G device on a poor connection or when the radio is in deep sleep state, it's 1 second to 2.5 seconds just to get the initial connection going. So what you want to do is to make sure that that initial payload that you come back with comes from the service worker so that you can get bits on screen so that while you're doing that connection to get out to the network to go get new data, you've at least got something on in the renderer process that's starting to parse, starting to render, as well as your code running to sort of communicate to users, hey, I'm going to go to the network now. Or better yet, as Jake goes on and on about, I completely agree with, getting the data that you previously had cached on screen immediately. I definitely want to see the cat photos that I had before while you're getting the new fresh cat photos.
To put some numbers to this, like a project I built earlier in the year, SVG OMG, and putting my money where my mouth is, I kind of went to town on it in terms of getting the most out of the performance. And on 3G, the best I could do was getting to render in 1.7 seconds, and like 1.65 seconds of that is all SSL, DNS, time to first byte, basically stuff that I have absolutely no control over because it was hosted by GitHub, and I can't just apply normal HTTP cache headers to that HTML page because I can't cache bust it by changing the URL because that's the URL users go to. That's the one they have bookmarked. But with the service worker, where I can kind of control the dynamic caching, control like how updates happen, the revisit render time. So after the service worker is installed, went from 1.7 seconds that I couldn't control down to 1/10 of a second that I could control. And for me, that's really worth it. Even discounting the whole offline thing, that's 1/10 of a second down from almost 2.
I think too. Alex kind of alluded to this, but the effect too is the user's perceived performance is a lot better. If you're showing those cached cat photos to the user, it feels like the app is responsive, maybe even online when it may not be. So not only do you get that true performance, but from a user's perspective, the performance feels a lot better too.
Yeah, the perceived performance, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I've found challenging, because I'm doing a code lab with Polymer and ServiceWorker on Friday, one of the things I found challenging was debugging, like if things happened. So I've been using the network tab in Chrome to go through and just see, okay, is this cached? Is this not cached? Is it, is ServiceWorker doing what it's supposed to do? Are there, not just for ServiceWorker, but are there other developer tools that we can use to help with this?
Yeah, and there's a resources tab, which will show you kind of the state of all the local storage types, including ServiceWorker caches today. And that gives you kind of a sense for what the ServiceWorker is going to be able to have access to. IndexedDB on the file system and sort of the ServiceWorker caches as well. The kind of the pro tip here that I wind up using a lot is if you go to DevTools now and you open up the console, there's a drop-down button where it normally says, bracket top frame. That's a drop-down button. And if there's a service worker installed or running, that service worker will actually be in the list, and you can go over there and you can start running code inside the service worker. Similarly, you can put breakpoints inside the service worker so the next time a request comes through it, or the next time you refresh the page, you'll get broken there correctly, and then you'll be able to sort of inspect the request and response. I use that all the time. And in fact, if you break inside of a fetch handler, you can just sort of like cons up whatever response you want and add whatever code you want. And then the last thing is that because DevTools is so amazing, save and continue is a thing. So if you don't know about this, you can just start editing the service worker code for your thing in line, hit Open Apple S or Control S. It saves, and the next time you use it, it uses that version instead. And then you can sort of copy that out and keep it in your local development environment as well. So you don't sort of have to do the other thing. One last thing, which is if you're developing with service workers in Chrome today, Shift Open Apple or Shift Control R, like hard refresh, skips the service worker. That is to say, it goes to all the way to the network for the top level request. It gets that top level thing, which will start the service worker installation process over again. So if you're trying to develop, like you're making changes quickly to your service worker, you want to do Shift Control R or Shift Open Apple R and then Control R again to get the service worker version of that response, right? Because there's sort of two versions. So the version where in the land before time where you don't have the service worker running, you get it installed at some point, and then you've got the moment when you start using it and it can start to handle requests. So to go all the way for the new version, use Shift Open Apple R.
In Chrome flags, we've got enable developer tools experiments, and this is where we're hiding some of our sort of latest service worker thinkings. Once you've enabled that and restarted the browser, and this bit's hilarious. If I can find the settings, if you go into experiments and then you press Shift as many times as you need to.
It's 6 times.
6 times. There we go. And
very quickly.
And in there will be service workers in resources panel, which I've already enabled because I've been looking at it. And then it appears here. There's service workers, and you get all sorts of extra stuff. So you can kind of see the waiting, as Alex was talking about there. This is a service worker for the next version that's waiting. There's an active one there. You can hit inspect and get a DevTools window for that. But you can also just come into this drop down here and go straight into the service worker and start running code in the context of there, and you can see sort of everything. So this is something we're working on. There's cache storage there. You can see everything that's cached. It's kind of early days for these DevTools, but we were ahead of that
cache.
cache.
The internals page.
So
that is always there. Yeah.
This is the really low-level stuff. Yeah, Chrome Service Worker internals kind of shows you. Sometimes it's interesting just to go here and see which sites have just installed service workers. I'm in Canary, which I don't use for day-to-day browsing, so there's not a whole lot here. It's just stuff that I've been testing. But
if you have one running, it should show up there. You should be able to inspect it from there as well.
Yep. So if I could go to this one, hit start, and then get console logs, and if I hit inspect, I can get a DevTools window for that. Just because this stuff is JavaScript, we were ahead of app cache from the get-go because we have JavaScript debugging tools already. You can set breakpoints, you can inspect values, you can run code. But even then, this is something we're improving on a day-by-day basis.
So all these features are in the current version of Chrome or Canary?
So some of them are in the current version. I think cache inspecting, which is this cache storage thing here, that's in current Chrome. This service workers menu is in Canary, behind the flag and the shift and the journey of the mounting and requesting it from the wizard, and all those steps. But yeah, cache storage is there by default.
And now, is service worker internals, I know there was some discussion that was going to eventually go away in Chrome at some point. Is that going to stick around for a while?
It might be one of those things that ends up there forever for ultra low-level debugging, but it certainly is a focus of where we send developers, where it's going to be sort of a user-friendly UI. That will be just in normal DevTools. In the same way that we have DevTools Timeline as the friendly way of debugging performance issues, whereas if you want, you can go to About Tracing and go to the real low level, which is not user-friendly but has a lot more lower-level information.
John and Jan, when you guys aren't working on service worker stuff, is there other debugging tools that we can use for, let's say, Hood.ie or any other types of the solutions?
We haven't, what I really want to see is an Ember DevTools extension for Hood.ie, but we haven't done one yet. Maybe the Pouch people will beat us to it. That would be really nice. For now, we use just regular DevTools, and we make heavy use of private browsing windows to test things. Especially if we do multi-user login things, that we have to test synchronization between private browser windows is where it's at, but it's not very sophisticated yet.
Is it really hard to sort of box yourself into a corner Like as far as the manifest, like let's say you need to clear it because something is going horribly wrong. Like how do you clear ServiceWorker out totally from an application, or even how do you offline in general, how do you clear out all of that?
So you can we check for an update to the ServiceWorker every navigation and sometimes on push message as well. You can trigger an update programmatically if you want as well as an update method. If you cache your ServiceWorker script for 100 years, we'll look at that and go, that looks wrong. We're going to cache it for a day. So you can't get yourself into lock-in in the same way that you could with app cache.
Well, hold on, just a very this is a very confusing point. We don't cache it for just a day, but we'll continue to look for updates in the background after a day. It's not like you're going to get booted out after a day. It's that we're going to go, oh, well, you probably didn't mean to never let us check for it again, so we're going to check for it after a day.
So if you've completely broken your site to the point where you're just serving network errors from the ServiceWorker, we're still going to check for an update when that happens. And you can, when the new version of your ServiceWorker comes in, it can, during its install step, go, I am just going to take over all the existing pages because the previous version is just completely broken. And then when your new ServiceWorker activates, it can even go through all of the clients that are connected. And by clients, I mean sort of the windows, the pages that are controlled by that ServiceWorker. And you can cause them to refresh from the ServiceWorker. So your new ServiceWorker can come in, take over, and refresh everything as a way to get out of the kind of network error that you have. And you could also do that if you're just making an urgent update, such as a security update, where you realize you've left the pages are working, but they have some kind of security vulnerability. So you absolutely want to refresh those pages, even if it's disruptive to the user, because you're getting dangerous code off their system.
Let's say there's some caching strategy employed on the server side, and then you have something like ServiceWorker taking control of some other things. Is there ever a conflict between that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, I mean you can get yourself into all kinds of hijinks. The way to think about it is that the ServiceWorker is a local network proxy, and so anything you could screw up in your application with a proxy, you can screw up with your application with a ServiceWorker, and that is nearly everything. One of the things that I found very instructive was one of the larger teams here at Google started prototyping with ServiceWorkers, and they sort of read the spec, and they had a bunch of questions. We answered those questions, and they read the spec again, and they came back with more questions, and then they came back to us with a document. It was probably 10 pages long, which was their plan for building and testing a ServiceWorker deployment at scale, and then iterating on it. They tested the scenario where they wanted to get it installed, and then they wanted to see the installation rates and the failure rates. Do clients in the wild have problems with it? Were there problems in the system? This was very early when we were developing it. When they wanted to kill it, they built an entire kill switch architecture so that they had a very fast update path for understanding how to get a busted ServiceWorker out of the environment quickly. So they didn't set a very long TTL on the ServiceWorker so that they would always get an update check. We're actually probably going to put a kill switch system in the ServiceWorker spec at some point to try to help make this a little bit easier for folks who are operating at scale. And then they tested all of it. They tested deploying a dummy ServiceWorker. They tested the latency impact of that. They tested the impact of how quickly they were able to drain traffic to the ServiceWorker from their users. They were able to test and monitor it all, and they put in good monitoring about all the situations. One of the best parts about ServiceWorkers is that you can have a central place to log a lot of operations about your website. One of the worst parts about that is that if you don't do that logging there, you might lose your logging forever. So thinking about it as a local network proxy for your application, where you can do kind of arbitrarily sophisticated stuff, is a good mental model, and it kind of sets you up for treating it with care, but treating it as the powerful tool that it is. And now that we see very large percentages of internet traffic now being either going through a ServiceWorker or having a ServiceWorker registered on the origin, it's kind of important that very large sites use that level of care.
We were talking earlier about the potential sort of learning curve for this stuff. I think people who do server-side stuff are going to find ServiceWorker a lot easier than people who just do client-side stuff. Because if you do server work, then you're familiar with the kind of how to handle streams. how buffering of streams works, and things like, you're serving content from the service worker. It is essentially, you're just building a server. The difference between a server and a service worker is the service worker can also manage cross-origin assets, whereas when you're doing a normal server, you tend to only be dealing with, you're only dealing with stuff your origin can serve. As part of that, I often find that when I'm writing a service worker, in my fetch handler, I'll have kind of one big if block, or farm it out to another function where I'm handling URLs that are from my origin. I've sometimes had code where I've broken the URL up into parts, and I've gone, if the path is /image/something, then do this. And I've like, oh, hang on, but that's also going to catch requests for /image, but an entirely different origin, because I'm just looking at the path name of the URL rather than the host name as well. So that I would say that's the only difference. But if you're used to doing server-side stuff, especially in Node, then Service Worker should make a lot of sense.
So there's been a lot of work, a massive amount of work that's sort of gone into the specification for Service Worker. Mozilla's implementing it. Obviously, Chrome has it. There's a lot of work ongoing. I mean, are there contentious bits among vendors at this point that are going to sort of be roadblocks for Service Worker?
There are definitely contentious bits. Something that I know Mozilla's been unhappy with for a long time is the coupling of fetch with the rest of Service Worker. I know Arne van Kesteren, who unfortunately is not here, he's been unhappy with the scoping from the get-go. So we use scoping in Service Worker so you can have multiple service workers on an origin. It's in some cases fetch specific, but there may be other features that use it. But scoping has allowed us to ship this in a way that will work on GitHub pages. It's allowed us to ship it in a way that will work on your university server, where you don't have a lot of server control, and pages are siloed by tilde your username. And the scoping allows us to let you use Service Worker within your directory, but not completely alter the serving of someone else's part of the origin. And some of those were concessions we had to make, because in reality there's no security between directories of a website, but people think there are, and kind of construct servers thinking there are. In terms of things that are going to block, I don't think so. But Alex, you might have a different opinion.
Obviously, I'm just as partisan as Jake. I think we're seeing quite a lot of momentum. We're seeing quite a lot of adoption. Features that it unlocks, like push notification, are seeing uptake at a level that we've kind of never witnessed for a web feature before. So maybe there are bits that aren't ideal, and I've always said that we don't know what they are yet. We will have made mistakes, but we'll figure out what those are too late. I'm hoping that we've done a lot of course correcting over the design process that will allow us to continue to iterate. And we shipped a relatively small subset early on, and then we added the bits that we, in coordination with large potential users, heard that they needed most, and we're continuing to do that on the Chrome side. And I think that's sort of leading the way for others and making it easier for people to ship implementations that are much less risky. One of the things that's happening that's important is that Jung-Ki Song, who's our fellow editor, has been, he's honing in on that last 3 or 4 issues for what we're thinking of as the V1, which is like the basic subset that includes, some bit of offline capability, scoping, registration, kind of all that basic spec stuff. And once that's done, we should have a kind of a stable spec for everyone to implement as kind of the V1 spec for service workers. And that'll probably happen, at least as a working draft sometime this year. So we are, we've got implementations, multiple compatible implementations coming, and a stable draft spec. So I think that's, that's kind of where you want to be for a thing that's on the path to being everywhere.
Yeah, we've not been afraid so far to change things in the browser, but we've always done that with data. Like we've made sure that we haven't made changes that are going to break sites based on the usage that we've observed, and because we can add tracking within Chrome to sort of know how often a particular function is called, so we kind of know like, oh, we can change this API because it's not too bad. Or if it is something we do need to change that people are using, we can do it slower and put warnings in the console to kind of make people aware that they're going to have to also do it this other way, because this is going to become the way of doing it sooner or later. Yeah, there's a lot less of those breaking changes happening now as we're focusing on the kind of V1 stuff. Some of the experimenting we've had to do live has kind of been a byproduct of that. We don't have vendor prefixes anymore, and that's great. But it also means it's sometimes difficult to get real developers experimenting with this stuff, or certainly sort of using it on sites. So some of our feedback has come after we've actually put this in stable. But rather than have something that's permanently broken, we've not been afraid to change it.
Working with governments and in particular hospitals in this case, where John works with I shouldn't say hospitals, but medical field in general. There's a lot of slowness on the IT side, and so when we're developing applications and we're thinking about offline, I would imagine, and John, you can jump in here I would imagine that it's difficult to gauge the interaction of those two things, because building web apps with Ember or whatever modern technology you're using, you're going to move pretty fast, whereas the IT department might be like, well, CouchDB we haven't even looked at and it's been out for how long. So how do you handle that on that side, John?
So the one thing that I think has helped out a lot is evergreen browsers. The fact that Chrome and Firefox, that they're self-updating, I think it really helps with the adoption from a web browser perspective. Now, when you talk about offline technologies or stuff like CouchDB server side, I think if you can make the story stick with your IT department of, listen, these things are going to improve performance, they're going to help out with support requests where before you may have gotten requests because the network was down. So I think there's benefits there that if hopefully you can have those conversations, people can see that, listen, it's going to reduce your network load, it's going to reduce support requests, that kind of thing I think can help.
I've done some work, or my company has done some work in the medical field as well. We've helped with the Ebola outbreak in West Africa last year and earlier this year, and
nice.
You're asking about what's the IT situation, and this we're a bunch of white guys here, so this is our perspective. But the IT scenario in West Africa is there is no infrastructure. There's barely 3G. There's edge almost everywhere, and the NGO that we were working with just had to get thousands of tablets and smartphones, mostly Android, to deploy to all the various relief sites to get our software going there. And we had no we could somehow sort of dictate what we have to work with, but also we had no choice but doing something like using Couch and Pouch on the back end, to get that syncing going to just solve the problem there in that environment. And I think it's very important to get all these more international views into the web platform discussion as well. So yeah, just something I thought I'd mention.
As far as stuff that's out in the wild, I've seen a lot of demos and a lot of prototype type things, but what is the most impressive thing that is offline that you guys have seen out there?
The problem is offline is like security. When it works, nobody cares. So offline isn't impressive. The impressive is when I'm in the subway somewhere or in the tube in London, and I use I try to refresh my Twitter, and the first thing that doesn't happen is it throws away all the current Twitter that I have that I could still be reading while it fetches the new one, but that doesn't happen. There's the absence of annoyances is not impressive as such, but yeah. So it's really hard to pinpoint to that one thing that's really amazing.
I think from a technical level, though.
I think it was the Financial Times, Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, that the person from the Financial Times talked about it at the Full Funnel conference in Brighton a couple of years ago. They've been doing offline website stuff on their main web property for a couple of years now, and it's one of the sites that can't break, so they have to be very conservative, but they're also doing cutting-edge web platform stuff, so that's really interesting to see. Jake, do you have a bunch more examples?
There's devdocs.io is one that I use all the time. It makes me sad that it's app cache, so it's open to the same vulnerabilities that app cache is. I'd love to see them go ServiceWorker. I think they're blocked on HTTPS at the moment. So the problem with working at Google is you forget what you're allowed to publicly say and what you're not. So there are companies that, like big, large companies that I'm aware that are pursuing this, and I'm afraid to say their names in case I get fired, like if I'm breaking confidentiality. But which ones are in the open? So the Guardian.
We'll just edit that part. You can go ahead.
If you look at the Guardian, because they do their work all in the open, they've got a PR at the moment that's adding some offline capabilities to their site. They're starting off small with experiments, like they're starting off with a kind of fallback offline page, but that's just the start of their work. I'm incredibly excited about that, and that's all using ServiceWorker. Facebook are rolling out push messaging across the web, so that's ServiceWorker, but I really hope they're looking at the offline side of it, because one of the worst experiences that I have in native apps, which, if they're not careful, they'll duplicate, is this experience where I am on the underground or on the train or, somewhere where I feel the need to look at my phone rather than the faces of real people, and I'll look at my phone will have notifications, and I'll tap on one of those notifications because, the message looks interesting, but it cuts off because of the limit of data in a notification. And then it fails to show me the relevant data because it goes to the app can't make a connection, and everything fails. And it's doubly worse as the notification is now gone. So I actually now have less information than I had before I tapped on the notification. So I kind of think
bloody annoying.
Yeah, it's so annoying. And I've heard real users, the real people, and like us, actually complain about this as well. Anything that shows notifications really should work offline, for at least that notification. When I tap that, I should be able to see the relevant information that notification relates to.
I've had the developer of the podcast app for iOS, Overcast, Mark Harmon, who's famous for a bunch of other stuff as well. He explained how he uses the notifications for that exact same reasons, and iOS's platform offers you to do silent notifications, so your app gets updates, but they do not display to the user, so your app can do stuff. Then your app can be running in the background for a bit and maybe fetch that data, and then the app can send a local notification to the user, so the app can be prepared. I know I have this stuff now it's safe to show this thing, because he wants to avoid that you go to the app and then nothing is there. And
so in the service,
there's a whole lot of infrastructure in there, being able to send private notifications just to apps, being able to send local notifications from the app to the user on the device, to make that all going. I don't know what the current state of this is on the web, but we must have these things, and ideally not have the other things, so people don't accidentally opt into the wrong way of doing this.
Yeah, so in the ServiceWorker, when you get a push message, because that lands into the ServiceWorker, you get an event, and you can kind of do what you want at that point. I mean, the usual case is to show a notification, but you are free to cache content, make requests before you show that notification. In Chrome at the moment, we require you to show a notification if there is no window for the site currently open. And this is just us treading carefully with privacy. That we're kind of worried at the moment that you might opt into notifications and not realize that means the site can, just through a push message, which is cheap and easy, they can wake up and run code on your device. So we're trying to work out how to make sure that users are aware that's happening. I mean, of course, every native app that does push messaging can do this whenever it wants, but we kind of hold the web to a higher standard in terms of that. So yeah, we don't want to break that. So if you don't show a notification within a certain amount of time, then we'll show a notification for you that just says this site updated in the background, just to make it clear that there's work going on.
Privacy is a really good point. If we're all running around with our own personal devices that are all secured with our fingerprints, having stuff cached offline is no problem, but that's not everyone again. A huge part of the internet population still uses internet cafes, even in the Western world. So do I want my email cached on that machine? How can I guarantee that that's deleted when I close my session, close the browser? All of these kind of things we need to talk about. How persistent is this in NextDB or PouchDB Store or whatever we're using? And like if somebody's really after me, like what can they snoop from the browser caches after I'm gone? And like I'm very glad that you're very careful with this.
Yeah, we do the right thing with incognito mode. I mean, ServiceWorker will work in incognito mode, but as soon as that last window closes, it's essentially a user profile that gets nuked as soon as those windows close. In terms of push messages, what we're worried about is just through continual pings with push messaging, run code could be running on your phone that is looking at your IP, sending that back to a server, and all of a sudden you have a kind of low-resolution location tracker just off the back of that. And that's the kind of thing where, like, it's not really clear to the user that by accepting push notifications, that becomes a possibility.
It's all interesting stuff. I think we could go on for like another hour. We're up against time, so I'm definitely going to wrap this one up.
Yeah, I'm especially worried that the more we talk, the more this permanent marker on my face seeps into my skin and becomes truly permanent. I'm kind of worried at how many layers of skin I'm going to have to remove to get this off.
Definitely send it after me.
It'll come off.
I'm sure you'll have a home video about it for us. All right, well, Alex had to jump off. How do people find you guys, and where's the best places to go? So start with Jake.
I am Jaffa the Cake on Twitter, and I'm also jakearchibald.com for my blog.
I'm JANL, J Yanel on Twitter. We run offlinefirst.org and the Offline First GitHub organization. We kind of don't want to own it. We want that this is a community effort. We're not trying to make this a commercial thing or anything. We need this open source library that I talked earlier about earlier. And like you can help. Like if you ever have a pull request or a suggestion for the organization, I make you a contributor and you can do whatever. We need people who go through the stuff that's already there and organize it and make it more accessible for people. We need people who collect everything that we have and put it in the org, and we also put it in the newsletter. We probably should have, like, I don't know, maybe set up a discourse thing where we can talk a little bit more. We have a Slack channel where we have a bunch of discussions, which is also really popular. You can all find that from offlinefirst.org. So if you wanna go into anything of what I just talked about, just go there, and you'll find links everywhere. You'll find Hood.ie on Hood.ie with the coolest domain ever. If you don't want to worry about all these details, just want to build web apps that work offline.
Do you have, for the newsletter, is there like a repo where we can post stuff for upcoming issues?
The way we're doing it is just open an issue. Like, hey, here's an interesting link, and then we'll just put it into the newsletter, and it's also in the org. Or send links to me on Twitter or email, I don't care. Like, just send me the stuff. I'll put
we'll
it
ask you on all the channels. All right, John?
You can reach me on Twitter at JKLEINSC. Or you can also check out the Hospital Run project. It's hospitalrun.io, and we're looking for contributors if anyone's interested. So.
All right, thank you guys. It's been really awesome. I've learned a lot on this one myself. I hope everybody else did. So thanks a lot. This has been episode 60 of the Web Platform Podcast.
Bye.
You want to learn more about what's coming on next on the Web Platform Podcast? Follow us on Twitter at the Web Platform, or on Google Plus and YouTube at Plus the Web Platform. We also need your help in creating transcripts of the episodes and helping to create open source projects under our GitHub organization. Contact Eric Isaacson at eIsaacson
Or Danny Blue at D_Blue. That's DEE_BLOO.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and we'll catch you all next week.
Yeah, I'm especially worried that the more we talk, the more this permanent marker on my face seeps into my skin and becomes truly permanent. I'm kind of worried at how many layers of skin I'm going to have to remove to get this off.